Welcome back to the Comic-Con Africa YouTube channel. Today we have one of the industry leaders in the video game world, is Jeff Pobst, and we are chatting all things video games. Very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to this, Jeff. Hello there.
Thank
How
you so
are
much.
you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's good, that's good. All right, Jeff, let's chat about how you started to get into the technology field, right? If I'm not wrong, it does involve the story of a church.
Indeed, technology and computers weren't so prevalent when I was young. I'm a little older now. And when I was about 10 years old, one of the first personal computers I ever saw was actually donated to the church that my family went to. And on Thursday nights, the gentleman who had donated the computers to the church, which in general the church didn't know what to do with at that time because computer software was very, very new, he would teach a group of 8 or 10 of us how to program in BASIC. So I started learning to program when I was pretty young. Throughout school, ended up, saving up money, working jobs, buying my own computers, and learning to program. When I went off to school, I was thinking about, getting a job as a computer programmer. But at that time, again, old guy, a lot of the colleges were only teaching you about how to make chips and how to do compilers. And I really liked software for what it could do, what kind of ways you could learn things or entertain or do something with. And so I ended up, I loved airplanes and spacecraft. I always thought that was cool. So I ended up going to school for aerospace engineering. Ended up working in the laboratory, sticking around with a professor who knew a lot of programming, but also knew optics and lasers. And we worked together for several years, and I ended up getting my doctorate in aerospace engineering.
Sure.
I was working on spacecraft. I was working on propulsion systems. I was completely, out of this space for a hobby. And because I went to a really good school, that I was very fortunate to get to, I also took a lot of film classes because I really enjoyed entertainment. Technology and entertainment were always my favorite things. I figured technology would be the job and entertainment would be the hobby.
Yeah.
But several years after going to school, I ended up sitting on an aircraft next to a producer from Sierra Online, and he needed more programmers for a King's Quest game. And that's how I got into the game industry, from learning to program, doing engineering, taking some film classes, and then mixing those all together in the video game world.
Sure, that's actually quite interesting because you've got like such diverse pieces of you that you've picked up along the way. How would you say that that's brought a little bit of you into what you do now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think I learned, if you really try and deconstruct it, and actually as a game developer, all the time, all we're doing is taking something that was made and created and crafted and trying to deconstruct the rationale behind it. But if I do that with my own life, I think what I learned how to do in college and in science was how to do really big projects that took multiple years, that often took multiple people. How do you organize them? How do you plan them? How do you decide how to get all your stuff, take your data, get your dailies if you're doing films? How do you put it into a package for other people, whether it's writing the papers or the journal articles or editing together the footage to make a story, and then creating a way to put that out and share it with other people so that it actually resonates with them. And whether it was film, whether it was science, or whether it's video games, the process of doing that is actually really, really similar. What exactly you do is actually quite different. Yeah. But that mentality and that organization, and that's why I probably fallen from programming more into producing and then executive producing and now running a studio, but staying very close to the game process because I care very much about the product.
Yeah. So when you take on new projects at HiddenPath, what exactly is the intention? What is the core of it? Where do you start with your projects?
Yeah, often there's kind of two ways you approach it. And the one driving factor in really most entertainment is finding the financing to build a thing on spec that won't make any money until it's done.
Sure.
It's really actually quite hard, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, whether it's a video game. If if you have the capital, whether it's from investors, whether it's from publishers, whether it's from yourself, from past projects where your past projects have earned money, and you say, okay, how do I want to invest this? What do we think we can do that will entertain people, that we will be both proud of and we think will be a really good quality entertainment, but also will resonate enough with the audience that they go, oh, I want to spend my money on this, and I'm willing to, and it will actually hopefully make its money back, so that you don't just lose money on the project, or hopefully even better, make a profit and actually give you the opportunity to have more success down the line. So for us, we're always talking with a lot of the different funding sources to see what they're interested in funding, what they want to do. And we're looking for that kind of Venn diagram overlap of what they want and what we think we're good at and what we can do to entertain. HiddenPath historically has been a group of people with a lot of industry experience who can make high quality content, and that's an important thing for us. We really want things to feel solid and entertaining for the player and visually interesting, very visually pleasing. But we also want to have really good gameplay, and I think we have a lot of systems background where we understand the balance of things. One of our first independent titles was Defense Grid, and it was just a tower defense game that at the time there had been many. I think we looked at 86 when we did our deconstruction, to look at what does this one do, what does that one do, why does this one do that, and we created this giant table, and we said, okay, if we were to make the world's best tower defense game, which was our goal, what would it do from these things, and what new could we bring to it? And that was what set us down the path of working on Defense Grid. That opportunity, that game ended up coming out on Steam. Valve really enjoyed it. They saw some of the design things that we had done in that, and that led to the conversations where we started helping out on Counter-Strike, and ended up turning into doing a brand new Counter-Strike, and now is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. We've done the same thing with Microsoft on the Age of Empires series, and we've worked with a group of several other IPs, some of which we can talk about, some which we can't. But we're really excited when we get opportunities, and we're really excited to then share our take of how we can bring great entertainment to those opportunities.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed across all the titles that you've mentioned is there's a very strong competitive strategy element to that. How have you seen that you've carried that through? Because I mean, if you look at Age of Empires, busy building a city, obviously there's objectives with that. With Counter-Strike, as much as it's a go game, you've kind of got to, everything is kind of calculated. That's obviously intentional, but how do you find the way of making that still fun? You know what I mean?
Interestingly, one of the things I got to do before we formed HiddenPath was work at Microsoft on the Xbox team. Yeah. And the roles that we had on the team that I was on was to go around the world and help developers make their game the best it could be for this new platform, the original Xbox, and then later the Xbox 360. And one of the things that opportunity opened up was the ability to visit hundreds of game developers all around the world, and from Korea to all over North America, Canada, and all over Europe. And at one time I was going to come to South Africa and visit a developer there, but that trip ended up getting canceled.
Oh no.
But there are game developers all around the world, and the thing we learned, those of us who got to go and visit with them and listen to them and try and help them, was everyone makes games so completely differently, and the cultures at each studio are so completely different, and sometimes they're very tied to what the studio is about, and sometimes the studio is about competitive gameplay. That's their thing. And you are right that all of our games have a competitive gameplay, or at least many of the major ones so far have had a competitive gameplay component to it. But interestingly, culturally, we're not a competitive gameplay culture at HiddenPath. We're a game design culture. Sometimes you would run into studios who would be very genre focused. That's a shooter studio. That's a strategy studio. Or they might be really art focused, or they might be really tech focused. And what we really wanted to be when we formed our studio was a real game design philosophy focused, such that we could work on any kind of game. We could really think about the different pacing, the different mechanics, and the different flow patterns for a player that would be fun. We wanted to be the studio about fun.
Yeah.
And so that focus and the systems focus I was talking about earlier actually tend to combine pretty well into games where the player has a lot of choice. They can do a lot of different things. And the way you allow for that in designing a game is to actually create systems that we call are balanced, so that you can have success doing it this way, or you can have success doing it that way. Or if you come up with a completely new way, the game allows for that. And both a multiplayer shooter like Counter-Strike, or a single player tower defense game like Defense Grid, or a multiplayer or single player strategy game like Age of Empires, those all fit that particular approach.
Sure. So I mean, you've been a developer. You've worn the hats of a publisher. You've even worked, as you mentioned, with as the console manufacturer Xbox, which is fantastic. And
Yeah.
I wanted to know from you, which of those have you really enjoyed the most? I'm sure that's like trying to pick of your favorite children, and you've probably had great experiences with each of them.
I fully enjoyed all of them. I really have. But actually, it's pretty easy to say what I've enjoyed the most, because, well, what I've done is after working as a developer at a large company and then as a publisher. I had both roles at Sierra for a while. I was producing external games that other companies made, and then going to Xbox and working with external companies. I realized my love was in actually making the product and being tied to that. And so that's why we formed HiddenPath. And so the answer to your question would be, being a developer is, for me, the best part. I love the team. I love the people I get to work with. I love how varied their experiences are. Artists, designers, quality assurance folks, programmers, audio folks, musicians and sound effects people, voiceover people. One of the things I've gotten to do, and it came a little bit because of the film school, is I've been able to direct voice actors for all our games for all of Hidden Paths games, and then mini games since back into the Sierra days. So for about 20 years. And that's, not something that happens a lot in game development. You typically need to do 10 to 15 hours of recording per game, depending upon the game that you make. Sometimes it's much more, sometimes it's much less. So it's not a frequent thing, but it's one of those things I also really enjoy.
Yeah. Speaking about trends within the video game industry, is it popular to find somebody with your expertise in the industry? Where there has been a developer, there has been a publisher, there has been somebody that's worked at a console manufacturer. Is it a common thing, or is it very much a unique thing to you?
The video game industry in general, everybody has a really unique story, especially anyone that's older than 30. Just because if you're older than 30, there were not schools for video games. So you came in from somewhere else. And everyone has an amazing story. My story is a bit unique in that I have been, like you said, a developer, at a publisher, and at a console manufacturer. But there are others who have this story as well. So it's not extremely rare, but so many different people come to the game industry from so many different walks of life. There are people who were tabletop RPG players who ended up getting into systems of video games. There are people who were graphics programmers or network programmers who did security or databases that ended up being in games. There's all sorts of really interesting stories. I think this entertainment medium really pulls people from all sorts of walks of life and all sorts of backgrounds. And it's harder than ever to get into the game industry because there are so many people who want to, and there are a fixed number of positions and roles. And when you have that supply demand, mismatch, it becomes more challenging. Like when I got in the video game industry was trying to get people in because it couldn't get enough. And I remember when I told my parents I was going to leave spacecraft propulsion behind and go into this video game thing, they go, "Are you going to be okay? Will you be looking for a job in a year? Is everything going to be all right?" It was a different industry than it is now. Now we talk about it as one of the largest entertainment industries that exist. But that doesn't mean that individual companies don't rise and fall and change and have all sorts of issues. And so there are several people who move jobs, and we talked about, kind of coming back to your original question, are they at a publisher, are they at a developer, are they at a console manufacturer? Because we're not the most stable industry. I feel really fortunate that HiddenPath, our studio, has been around and been fairly stable for 14 and a half years now.
Sure, very well established. Which brings us into the future of gaming, which is super exciting. As I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of new console stuff coming out, lots of exciting hype around all of that.
Saw the PlayStation reveal recently.
How cool was that? That was very, very cool.
I was very impressed with what they did, yeah.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot on the horizon. So something that I want to know from you is, with all these crazy tech advances happening on the console side, do you think that it's finally time that PC and console are on the same playing path, or are we not quite there yet?
Well, I don't think we'll ever be there. From a consumer point of view, I'd love there to be one platform with all my games on it and all the prices to be low.
Yeah.
The market economy that we happen to all participate in doesn't quite work that way. If there isn't competition, prices go up. If there was only one console, it would probably be very, very expensive for us. So the fact there are multiple choices, PC, console, playing on your phone, different ways of playing different kinds of games, really keeps the market active and gives us the best choice as a consumer to have options. One of the issues the video game world has had over the last, I'm going to say 5 years, but it's probably always existed, just really been very large in the last 5 years, is this opportunity of, there's so many games that want our attention as players that it takes a lot of effort for them to get through to us and let us know that their game exists. The number of games that come out on Steam or the Epic Store every week is so large. And the number of games that release on a console in any month is very, very large. But I think the console companies will always work to try and have unique features that give you a good experience as a player. Sometimes we really focus on how many mega flops or how many different metrics of performance take place, and that matters because with more performance, the game developer can do more things, so that's always great. Yeah. But what also goes in a lot of these things, and you saw this first with the Xbox 360, and then with the PS4 and the Xbox One X, Xbox One and the Xbox One X, I guess coming soon, and PS5, is that some of those resources on these consoles and even on your PC are going not just towards the entertainment experience, but the ease of use experience. And they all have different takes on what's the best way to provide an easy way of getting your game, an easy way of getting right into your game, loading and instant loading, and all of these things actually take up some of the cycles and some of the hardware and some of the decisions that go into these things. I think PC is always going to be a great platform because it's a very open platform, and it allows a Steam to get created and exist and now feel like it's the center of the gaming universe on PC. But in many ways, it came about when there was none, and Epic has now come about, and others will come about. I mean, every major publisher, you can buy a game directly from them on the PC. Obviously, any online game like a PUBG or Fortnite, you buy directly on a PC from that creator. But you can go to Ubisoft, you can go to Activision, you can go to these big publishers and buy games directly from them without going through a store as well. Yeah. So the PC being an open platform really allows lots of opportunity for change. The closed platforms, the Xbox and the PlayStation, they offer something that the open platforms can't in this super ease of use. It's really simplified or streamlined is the real word I was looking for, such that it's very simple for a person to get in, get their game, get playing, and get going, and you don't have to worry about opening your PC up and changing components if you don't want to. So for certain consumers, they're going to gravitate towards the thing that uses their knowledge, their ability to tweak their PC and make it the best performing hardware, and they want a PC. And other consumers, they go, I want the game, just give me the game, make it easy for me, and they want a console.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. Myself, I'm quite a console kind of guy, and you've hit the nail on the head there. I want the game, I want to play it, I want to have fun, but I have mates and stuff who say, it's interesting to see the GPU and the RAM and all these kind of interesting stuff. So I think even if we do have the same SSD speed, even if we do have ray tracing and all that, that's actually really, really interesting that you've brought that up, that there's actually two different consumers within this market, and I'm sure that there's a whole bunch more.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely different design thinking, and then it appeals. Each of them overlap. I saw some article today before we got on that the percentage of people that own both consoles, even two
Yeah.
different methods of the same thing, is shockingly much higher than people had predicted.
Wow.
And it's often because they want to have the games, right, the content from each of those types of platforms.
Yeah. So another really, really exciting part about the games industry and where it's moving to and the developments and all the exciting things happening with it is VR. And that's something that you guys at Hidden Path have really, really dug into. How's that been?
Yeah, we had an opportunity about 5 years ago um, where Oculus called us up a week before a game developers conference and said, "Hey, we'd like to meet with you next week." And we said, "Oh, okay." And they said, "Yeah, we want to make your game. Let's talk about it." And I'm like, "Oh," when people say your game, they
Yeah.
often think about Counter-Strike. And even inside the game industry, it's Valve is the company that owns and makes Counter-Strike. They gave us a great opportunity to come and make it for them while they were busy with other things. At the time, they were working on Portal 2, and they were working on turning Team Fortress from a paid product into a free-to-play product with hats,
Yeah.
which was a complete change for them, right? And so we got to work on Counter-Strike. We were, several blocks away, and had a meeting with them, and over time earned their trust, and then had a really great relationship with them and shipped the product with them, and then they took it over. So I expected to go to this meeting with the folks at Oculus and say, yeah, one, I don't think Counter-Strike would be a very good VR game. It would make
Yeah.
you sick. And two, it's not even our game. It's Valve's.
Yeah.
But they said, no, the game we want to talk to you about is Defense Grid. And I'm just sitting there looking at them going, why would anyone want Defense Grid in VR?
Yeah.
Because it didn't seem like a big immersive experience for how I understood VR to be 5 years ago. And what they said is, no, we've tested so many different people with so many different things around VR. And what we find is the thing that, some people love fast motion experiences and it makes other people sick. And other people like really in-depth stories and being immersed around characters. And there are going to be games for them, but the other people get bored with that. But one thing almost everybody seems to like in VR is this idea that I'm a god and there's something on the table in front of me and I can mess with it. And we think your
Sure.
Defense Grid game would be a perfect example of that. We're
Yeah.
like, that sounds kind of cool. And so we started with take the very first experience was taking our existing game, completely redoing the way you look at the world and immerse yourself, completely redoing the UI so that it made more sense with the controls that you had, and seeing how the experience was in VR. And we had an amazing time. And I think it's a really great game. It's just, tower defense isn't always the first thing you think of when you say, I want a VR product. So
Yeah.
it has the same kind of detection and people finding it issue. But from that, it became a relationship with Oculus, where we got to learn about all the challenges, the development challenges of VR, and all of the different things that make VR really interesting. It's a much harder medium to work in as a game developer than, say, a console. In a console, I know I've always got the A button, the B button, or the
Yeah.
the X button, the square button, the triangle button. I've always got those, and I know how to interact with it. But every different VR game needs a new paradigm for how you're going to interact with it. Do I pick things up? Do I throw things? Do I point at things? And when I point at something, how do I tell it what I want it to do? And what kind of menu system do I create around my hands? Or what's
Jeez.
intuitive? And what's intuitive for a lot of people? And it becomes really, really interesting. I think one of the biggest games we made in VR was a strategy game kind of pulling from our Age of Empires experience called Brass Tactics.
Yeah.
And Brass is really unique in that we spent, they gave us the opportunity to spend half a year to 3/4 of a year just focusing on the interaction mechanics and getting those
Wow.
exactly right and intuitive, and then building the game for 18 months after that. It was a wonderful opportunity, and I think it's an amazing title, single player through it and multiplayer as well, for really exploring what you can do in VR to make things seem intuitive, mechanical, and natural for people to understand. And it was a wonderful experience. We just shipped a year ago Raccoon Lagoon, kind of an Animal Crossing meets Stardew Valley type title for Oculus Quest. And at the moment, that's our last VR title that we've worked on. Since then, we've been working on a brand new title that I can't talk about,
Oh,
unfortunately.
man.
It's going to take us a while. It's a very big game, so we're very excited about it. And it's going to be for PCs and consoles in some years ahead.
Jeez, that's exciting. That is, it's so cool to hear. VR is still so young, but to think about what's been achieved on it already, it feels like it's still when I see a VR set, it still feels like it's something out of a futuristic movie. To see
Yeah.
all the incredible things done with it, it's really something mind blowing. Did you expect the industry to adjust to it so quickly?
Well, I don't know. I think we all hoped it. And so I was old guy again. I remember when 3D cards first came to games, and everything had been 2D or software rendered 3D. And now we had hardware acceleration 3D, which opened up so many changes. And all of a sudden you had 3D games,
Yeah.
and it was completely different. And then when I was at Xbox, one of the big things about the 360 launch was what was bringing us into an era of high definition. When the console launched, 480i was still the norm around the world, or 560i in the PAL territories.
Yeah.
And now today we're in a 4K, 2K, world, which is just completely different. And it felt like VR was actually even a larger jump than any of those jumps. When you put that headset on and you turn your head and you see a table, and you turn your head back and the table's still there, your mind goes, "Oh, that's not graphics, that's real." Even
Yeah.
if it looks cartoony, your mind does that. It's
Wow.
bizarre.
Jeez.
Um, yeah, and so your mind just goes, "Oh, that's still there when I looked back, and so therefore it's really there." And the number of times I put my hand through imaginary tables, thinking that I was going to hold myself up, or it's just crazy.
Yeah.
Working in VR, having the headset for 5 years, you really get this amazing experience. But along with that giant leap that VR brings over traditional gaming, it brings with it probably the most of the other side of the equation, what we call the friction. So you have the advance and you have the friction. And almost every, when 3D cards came, the friction was I now had to buy a thing and put it in my PC. Until the consoles all of a sudden included 3D graphics. And then, okay, that world's different. And the high def friction was it took several years for people to decide to replace their televisions with high def televisions and hook the consoles in with the new cables required to connect high definition, which are now ubiquitous today.
Yeah.
VR is such a giant leap, but it's also probably some of the largest friction. I have to put a thing on my head. I have to not be able to really hear the people around me. I have to be comfortable doing that and feeling like, yeah, I want to go and play this experience and not worry about what's going on around me. And for a lot of people, that's harder to do, and it's heavy and it's a little hot sometimes. And every step of the way, technology is going to make that friction lower and lower and lower. But what no one in the industry knows yet is how low does that friction have to get before we move from 1 million or 2 million units of VR to 10 million, 20 million, 50 million units of VR. Because that's where the console world is, that 10, 20, 50 million. And that's when you can really spend a lot of money making really big games because there's enough people to buy them. When there's only 1 or 2 million people making VR or buying VR games, you have to be really careful on your budgets for VR titles because most of the things you're making just won't make the money back.
Jeez. I mean, it's a fascinating thing with a whole bunch of new challenges, like you said, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. I could honestly sit here and listen the whole time, Jeff. This has been so interesting and so insightful. Thank you so much. I think
It's my
learning
pleasure.
from an industry leader and having you talk to people and sharing your knowledge here on Comic Con Africa has been much appreciated. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Oh, I look forward to it even more. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.